Hello, everybody. This is James Brown from Texas Art and Film. I'm here with Dustin Chase and Mark White, also of Texas Art and Film. And we're here to discuss the top 10 of 2024. Hi, Dustin.
Hello. And of course, the top 10 means we're all going to have different things. It's going to look very different from each person.
That's true. Hi, Mark.
Hey, guys.
Okay, so everybody gets a chance. And yeah, we'll start with your number 10. Dustin, what was your number 10?
Well, I can't spell really well, so I'm just going to start with The Substance is what I currently have at my number 10. And mine are still in flux. What I like to do at the end of the year is once I've seen everything and turned in ballots for Critics' Choice Awards and those types of things, is I like to go back through and rewatch things because maybe I hadn't seen Dune since. So that's kind of in the process of what I'm doing. So mine's going to be a blend of alphabetical, numerical, and they're in flux. So that's my disclaimer there. So I'm going to start with The Substance, which I just rewatched. I think The Substance for me is kind of like the year with Hereditary, both movies I really, really like, both movies that push the envelope in the body horror genre. This one has a little bit more talking points, which I think is why so many people really like it. But after watching it again, that's where I kind of made the comparison with Hereditary, is that you've got a really, really good, maybe the best of her career performance. We're talking about Demi Moore here. And I think just like Hereditary, it's like there's so many good things to talk about, so many great cinematic technical qualities. The editing really stood out to me the second time. And the performances, her and Margaret Qualley are both really good. But the ending, just like Hereditary, kind of kept it from being an A movie for me. So the bottom of my list is always my B pluses. And so that's where it was for me. Really loved the performance, really loved the talking points, really loved what we're supposed to gather from the movie. And I like a lot of the pushing the envelope and what people can sit there and stand with the peeling off the fingernails and stuff. I think the movie could have ended when we get to hopefully everybody's seen it by now. And this is not much of a spoiler. When we get to the monster, I think we could have ended there. So that's the bottom of my list right now, or the numerical order of my list. So that's mine.
Okay. The Substance is on my list also. So we'll talk about it again.
Same.
Okay. Mark, what was your number 10?
My number 10, I went genre specific, and I tend to lean that way with a lot of different things, whether it's science fiction or horror, things like that. I had the chance to see this a few weeks before it aired stateside when I was visiting London, of all places, earlier in the year. So my number 10 is Late Night with the Devil.
Which I haven't. So tell us what that's about and why we should see it.
All right. So Late Night with the Devil is a found footage horror film set during a late night talk show on Halloween night of 1977, where this lost episode, which suddenly leads to the ending of this talk show, has resurfaced. And you, of course, as the audience member being given the opportunity to watch this. And as the episode unfolds, you're watching a talk show host who has had troubled times with media, with his personal relationship, coming back, trying to claim his spot in the limelight against like Johnny Carson, things like that during the time period. And he's planning a Halloween spectacular to bring in sweep weeks and everything else. And as he pulls in supernatural elements, like someone who's supposed to be a fortune teller and someone who dispels fortune tellers and things like that, it becomes this kind of witty repartee on screen. And then as the cameras roll the commercial, you go black and white behind the scenes watching how this show is actually made. So you get found footage portions here and there. And as the night rolls on, the host reveals that he's got an actual real life possessed human being ready to come on camera and talk to the crowd and talk to the audience about their experience. And of course, being a horror film, things go bad very, very quickly towards the very end. It's a brilliant mashup of found footage techniques. Personally, as someone who loves horror films, I really detest found footage as a genre, but the way in which it's done with the actual splicing of old 1970s filmmaking techniques and camera work and television shows, things like that, the way in which it goes between the polished, squeaky clean tape that would be shown on television versus what you see behind the camera going behind the scenes is really interesting as it goes from black and white and then to color and back and forward. And then, of course, the build up to what is actually going on with the possessed little girl that is brought out into the audience. It's just fantastic, old school, gory cinematography and special effects that kind of merging all into one. And it's just so much fun. I know that for a lot of best lists, it's always kind of the higher caliber stuff. That's the stuff that continues to roll around in the awards talk and things like that. But for me, it was a horror film that was just so much fun. It was visually striking. It was so different from anything I'd seen all year round that it just continued to linger somewhere in the back of my brain. So I wanted to make sure I acknowledged that one particular genre itch for me this year. So it's cushioned very comfortably in my number 10.
Okay, before we go on, I have 2 questions.
Shoot.
So my first question is, have you seen it again since you saw it at the big London gala? Have you
I
watched
did,
it,
yeah.
and it played just as good?
Yeah, there's so much fun to be had with the way that it leans into it knows exactly how cheesy it can be. So it's like, it's very 1977 with the clothing and the music choices, even the hand-drawn title card sequences that announce when they go to commercial break, the details that popped out on the second and third viewing really just, they tickled my funny bone. They're fantastic. But then what really caught me, especially the third time through, was David Demolshin's performance in this. David has popped up in stuff in bit parts in all genre work across all major studio stuff. I mean, even as far as the Marvel Universe, the guy pops up absolutely everywhere. He's never been given a starring role to really show what he's capable of. And in this, we get not only the charismatic host of a late night talk show, but as the horror starts to mount up, you get to see his personal tragedy. There's huge amounts of hubris. There's the actual horror of what's going on, the sheer terror that comes across him as it all kind of unravels. It is a revelatory performance from somebody who's always been a bit player. So I think the film is a little gem that has been slept on, and more people do need to see it.
Is there something that you can compare it to that maybe everybody has seen listening? Like, what's the closest
Ooh.
comparison?
The closest comparison. Oh man, I can't
Okay.
think of anything off the top
All
of my
right.
head.
Okay.
But like I said, the found footage genre is one of those things that I think a lot of people, especially people who study film like we do, malign it so much because it's so easy to do cheaply. It's so easy to do with bad editing, and you just kind of throw it together. This is so cleverly done that it kind of stands head and shoulders above that. So it's hard to compare it to other found footage films out there. This is not the Blair Witch Project. This is not As Above, So Below. This is so much better than all that because it knows the story it wants to tell, and it specifically chooses when you see what's on the broadcast and then what goes behind the scenes.
Okay.
Well, I'm excited for that movie myself. Horror is not my first choice, but I have, oddly enough, several on my list this year. My number 10, and I had a hard time with Blitz, was like right there with Civil War, and I really thought I was going to pull that up into the number 10 slot. But Blitz is something I didn't see till this month, till the end of the year. It's a Steve McQueen film. Saoirse Ronan plays the lead. Not a lot of other big name actors in the movie, but it is so well done. It's so well written and so well performed that I couldn't. It's one of the things that pushes you up an emotional moment for me. And if you can move me, then you really touch something. But I really liked all the action sequences. If anybody's ever seen or remembers seeing the Steven Spielberg movie Empire of the Sun, which is very similar to Empire of the Sun, except it's happening in the European theater. One of the things that happens during the Blitz, when Germany was bombing London, was many, but not all of the parents sent their children to live in the countryside. And there's been lots of movies made about the children living in the countryside and what life was like there. But this particular movie, the son is mixed race, and outside of his family, he's not welcome in the community and society. So when he is put on the train to leave, he decides to get off the train without anybody's knowledge and make his way back to London. So where he gets off is unclear, but it takes him the entire link to finally, make his way back home. And then, of course, when he gets home, I won't spoil it, but there's bombing going on. So you can imagine what might have happened by the time he gets home. There are lots of people that are kind to him, and there's lots of people that are unkind to him. And it's very much like the Steven Spielberg movie, Empire of the Sun. I liked it a lot. I like that movie a lot as well.
I will say that there are things that I really liked about Blitz. I am a huge Saoirse Ronan fan. I was really anchoring for her to be a double nominee this year. I don't think she's going to get anything, unfortunately. I was personally disappointed with the film. I actually showed it to my parents when they were visiting, and it was one of those films where there were little things that I really liked. My favorite scene in the entire movie, the only thing that really got me emotional, is the kid that you just mentioned who's biracial. doesn't really know how to identify at the beginning of the movie. And at one point, he's adamant that he is not a Black young boy. And then there is a beautiful moment in the film where he says that he is Black. And it's just the most touching, beautiful moment of a child learning to accept who he is. And that really stood out to me and elevated the movie. The rest of it, I thought, wanted it to be stronger and better personally. But that moment really, it still stands out to me, that one scene.
So, Dustin, let me ask you
Yeah.
before we move on here real quick, since you've touched on Saoirse and her performance here. Of the two that you were gunning for this year, the other one obviously being The Outrun, which of the performances do you think stands out stronger for her out of these
The
two?
Outrun. The Outrun for sure. I know you and I disagree on that movie. Still voted for her for Critics' Choice Awards. She did not make it in. It would be a surprise Hail Mary if she were to show up at the Oscars and miss all the precursors. But
Stranger things have happened.
the Outrun, I admit, is a difficult movie. It's much more difficult than one of the reasons I didn't care for Blitz as much. It's sort of a family movie set in wartime, which is unique. You don't normally get these types of war movies that are told through the eyes of a child being the main figure. Because as we were saying, Saoirse is the supporting character in Blitz. So that's unique about the film. And I guess maybe that turned me off a little bit because I don't usually do well with family films. And it's a very sweet movie, but it was a little too PG for me. But yeah, no, I was a big fan of The Outrun, and I just thought Saoirse was doing something I hadn't seen her do before. But yeah, it looks like it's not going to happen for her at all this year.
There's
Always next year.
for sure.
Dustin, what was your number 9?
All right, Steven, I don't want to hog cards. So as we were talking, I've tried to put them in better alphabetical order. So I'm going to go a little bit backwards and then I'll go forward. So I'll talk about Wicked now, which I am going to watch again tomorrow in the theater because I was only able to see it on screener before I had to vote. I had not, one of the few people who had never seen the musical, the stage play, I didn't know anything about the story. I knew nothing. I went in completely blind, thinking with low expectations, didn't think I would like it, resisted seeing it for the longest time. I put it at the end of my pile, but I really liked it. And I like the story. If it was not a musical, I would like it even better, probably. I couldn't tell you one name of one song or one line from any of the song. That's not what I was looking at. I'm just very interested in the story and it being a really unique prequel, someone taking something that's existed since 1939 on film and writing a prequel for it. Now, obviously, it was written for stage and the original was a book, but I just think it works really unique and that's what I liked about this movie, is that it doesn't change anything about what we know and love about the 1939 Wizard of Oz. It doesn't mess with that. You can have both things existing simultaneously and not affect each other. And I thought that was really cool. I went in thinking I was going to hate this and really, really enjoyed it. So I'm really excited to see it on the big screen tomorrow.
Okay.
Yeah, so Wicked sits just outside my top 10. It's like honorary mention on there. I loved it. And as someone who is a self-confessed theater nerd who did high school plays and musicals and things like that when I was in high school, it's one of those things that kind of just runs in the blood. It's one of those musicals that just everyone who's been to see it adores. Anyone who does the Broadway or the West End in London, they go to see it because they just know they have to go see it. So I won't spoil it any further for Dustin since he's not familiar with the entirety of the story. But to touch on a little bit what you just said there, it's really interesting how the book, which is full of crazy, wildly explicit stuff between Elphaba and other characters and everything else, was funneled down, watered down to make it as accessible as possible for the entire family on the stage. And then what Chu does is recognize the visual language of the 1939 classic and ensure that it does translate over. So you're not getting strange shapes or coloring that you don't recognize. You're not getting characters you don't recognize because they're so burned into the zeitgeist from the time period that the film first came out through onto today. Like, I want my money back. There's no way this works. So without going any further, I will say that when you guys get to part 2, which is called now Wicked for Good, you'll see how it dovetails with and it adds color to The Wizard of Oz, lightly adds different undertones to it, but it still remains very much untouched, which is really impressive.
Exciting.
So my only concern with Wicked Part 2 is all the great songs were in the first
Songs.
encore.
They're making new songs.
So
Oh,
there
good.
are two standout songs here from the second half, one of which is a big one for Cynthia, which she was going to just completely smash. And then the other one, which actually inspires, is the title of the second half, which is For Good, shared between Elphaba and Glinda as they reconcile after quite a few years, having not seen each other since the events of The Wizard of Oz then take place. And there's a few new additions that I know that Stephen Schwartz, the show composer, is now adding to this stuff that was left out from the original conception before it hit Broadway. They're not bringing it back in. So
That's
it should be
exciting.
interesting to see how the whole
That's
thing fleshes
exciting.
out. Yeah.
Now I'm excited for the sequel. Wicked did not make my top 10, and it wasn't. I don't even know that it was close. I enjoyed the Broadway show, and I didn't see anything other than the performances that was any more spectacular than the show itself. Some stage plays do make a great adaptation, and this one was fine. It didn't excite me.
See, I think I'm going to defend Dustin here just a tad and say that there's a lot that translates over from the stage that in sheer practicality of what you do with a stage production, whether it's, Elphaba being on a lift and a wire to do defying gravity versus having Cynthia on a broomstick, CG green screen, doing everything else. There's elements of it that obviously will have to transfer over very differently. But the
True.
energy between the two leads, between Glinda and Elphaba, is the thing that anchors the most. And everything kind of gets sucked into the vacuum of the two of them as friends around that. So all the supporting characters,
That happened in
everything. But I think what the camera allows you to do here is be more intimate with some of those setups and allow certain moments which move by so quickly on stage in a 2-hour production. They breathe much more clearly this time around. This is a good 40 minutes longer than the actual stage play because Chu wants you to make sure that you have every moment. You understand that the animals are under threat. And, there's real animosity between Glinda and Elphaba at first, and then you have to see them actually becoming friends. There's more translation, more breathability in those moments instead of having to clip through act 1, intermission, hit act 2. You have to make sure you give those moments time to breathe. And I think the film does that beautifully. So I agree. Not in my top 10, but I would definitely say Honor I mentioned, because there's no denying this film has reignited population interest in this. People just love it. They absolutely love it.
Honorable mention. I will accept that.
There you
Very
go.
good. What was your number 9, Mark?
My number 9 was Maria. I'm actually slightly surprised that I'm saying that because I am not a Lauren fan. I was not crazy about Jackie, and I did not like Spencer. So going into it, I was kind of already arms folded, like, okay, impress me. And then I was genuinely impressed. Maria Callas is not someone who I've ever heard out of ordinary mention in just basic passing for, European culture, things like that. So she wasn't somebody I was overly familiar with. Her life story, her struggles, her relationship with Onassis, all these different things were all brand new information to me going into it. But what struck me the most was that as Lorraine, he builds the film around Angelina's portrayal, which is all centered around the art. It's centered around her identity through her art, her struggle through her art, everything else. That when you finally get to the big payoff for her actually trying to find her voice, even though we know there's moments where it's not actually Angelina's voice unless she's actually struggling as the modern day Maria, there's a real believability to it. So for me, watching it from start to finish as she is grappling with reality, her sense of self, the lingering specter of death as it is with the news reporter there, it becomes so fascinating and so powerfully charged with her really grasping to try and get her voice back that by the end of it, my chin was quivering and I was totally, totally blown away by that. So an emotional response, yes, but I do think that it's also the most accessible film Lorraine has done. I think it's visually beautiful. I think he captures Paris and the atmosphere of Paris in that time period brilliantly. And there's something about the struggling artist that comes through so clearly and so precisely in this version of the struggling artist through Maria that I think transcends not just Angelina's performance, but kind of just adds to the canon of that whole genre. I think it's brilliant. I think it's really, really well done. I'm surprised I like it as much as I did, but I do have to say that Angelina blew me away, and doggone it if she doesn't take an Oscar for this.
Okay, I both agree and disagree with you. I, as you both know, love Jackie. I think Jackie, masterpiece. I just fell in love with his style of filmmaking. And I like Spencer. When I have issues with Maria, I really like it a lot. I have issues with Spencer, so they're probably tied for second for me. I'm really sad that he's not going to continue this Woman in Heels trilogy, but I really liked the weird horror elements that he had in Jackie and Spencer. The closest you get here is some black and white scenes. I agree that Angelina's performance is amazing. I think James and I have met her, and she is such a quiet, shy person. Like seeing her big, bold, loud, in your face, hateful, sarcastic. Like it's so far from her actual self. You understand what a real performance that is from someone so quiet.
I mean, you can really see it, just especially in that last performance.
I do disagree with you. I could never not see Angelina Jolie. That was part of my problem with this. I always saw Angelina Jolie and never for a second. Again, didn't know much about Maria Callas, but I just always saw Angelina performing. And that's not a bad thing. I'll watch Angelina, read the newspaper. I always felt like, ooh, this is Angelina performing. Something else I loved about it was how he ties this to Jackie and they're existing in the same universe. I thought that was really cool. But yeah, I had issues with this one. It's very performance based, and I could watch Pablo Larraín all day long.
All right. So my number 9 was Juror number 2, which I didn't expect to be my number 9. But again, the films that I thought were going to be in my top 10, a lot of them were very, very problematic. Juror number 2 was one of the 3 movies by octogenarian directors. We were kind of the consensus that Coppola and Ridley Scott, and actually Clint Eastwood is in his 90s, were kind of past their prime. And, they made movies that maybe would have been better if they were younger. I thought this one really had, it was really a good, solid movie. Of course, Nicholas Hoult plays the lead, and he had that morally complex role as a juror who, as it turns out, and this is definitely a spoiler, was party to the crime that he was hearing the case about. I thought the commentary on the subjective nature of what truth is and the responsibility of bringing forth the truth and the way a jury is composed. Often we see, and I guess we saw in Sing Sing, a true story of a person who was, all the circumstantial evidence was there and he was still an innocent man. And yet the jury found him guilty. This was a great example of that. And at the same time, the dilemma of Nicholas Holt's character. What did either of you have that on your list?
Well, no, I did not. I was not. I mean, I will watch any Clint Eastwood movie and have watched most of the movies that he's directed. Huge Nicholas Hoult fan. Nicholas Hoult had 3 movies this year. I might be talking about Nicholas Hoult later. For me, this felt like it should be on television and not on the big screen. I think the Warner Brothers CEO must have felt the same way since he didn't really try to push it in the theater. I felt Toni Collette was miscast, and I am a huge Toni Collette fan. It just
miscast, or did her role need more than was there?
I've never seen Toni Collette give a bad performance. Even though she's been in bad movies, she usually elevates it. I didn't understand why he chose her for this role. She doesn't have anything specific as an actress that I felt worked for this part. So maybe it's poorly written. I expect when I see Toni Collette to be like blown out of my theater seat, and I just wasn't at all. It just felt really like cheap's not the right word, but just weak. And I liked the moral questions it's asking, and that was the most powerful thing. But as far as filmmaking goes, I mean, the editing's just whatever. I mean, Nicholas Holt's okay. I think he gave better performance in his other 2 films this year, but I don't know. There was nothing brag worthy for me in Juror number 2. It's just like, oh, okay, what else is on?
So I don't disagree about Toni Collette not having enough of a role. And it could be the situation that I suspect with Metropolis, with that stellar cast. They just wanted a chance to work with Coppola. And maybe she just wanted a chance to work with Clint Eastwood. He's 94, 96, so he doesn't have many more movies in him. I'm imagining a lot of actors want that opportunity. And maybe that's why, because I agree that her part needed more.
Yeah.
And I don't think she would have taken that role if it had just been offered to her by just anybody.
Right. What did you think about Juror?
That's one of the ones I have not seen yet.
I haven't seen it. So my next one is a movie that I just watched because it was sent to me. Didn't know anything about it besides what I had heard about it being at Cannes, but talk about being blown away. The Seed of the Sacred Fig is the next one on my list. And this movie, I was unprepared. It was one of those where I sit down with my notebook, I'm like, oh, I need to watch this. They say it's good. And it's a movie that kind of opens intentionally by showing you the everyday, normal, mundane life of this family living in Iran. And I was just like, oh, is this going to be another one of those boring international movies where people are adding more to it than the movie's actually giving you? But then I start to see when things, you see, at first he shows you what the complete version of this family looks like. And then it slowly starts to unravel. And boy, does it unravel in a way that's so unimaginable that it turns into this suspense thriller. I stopped taking notes. I was so into it at some point. I'm on the edge of the couch and I just am zoned in completely. You forget that you're reading subtitles. I was sweating by the end. It just really sucks you into this world. The performances are just, whoa. If these were named actors, they'd be all over every awards list. And it's just so well written. And that doesn't even take into consideration that this guy, the director, risked his life, was jailed, had to escape, had to edit this movie cross-continentally with the editor. The actors had to flee Iran. I mean, there are probably no other movies in the awards race this year where the people involved in the Seat of the Sacred Fig risk their lives to make this happen. Not only is it timely, it's well done. I mean, everything from the acting, the editing, the writing, the cinematography, it's all top notch. I mean, this is top 5 of the year best film if you've seen it. The problem is a lot of people don't watch international films, but this is your international Oscar winner right here. And my prediction is that it's going to get a Best Picture nomination as well.
Interesting.
Mark, did you see this one?
I did, yes. I saw this one a while ago.
Is it on your list?
It's, again, alongside Wicked, it's in that honorable mention. And I think the reason I didn't latch onto it as intimately as Dustin did, the one thing that kind of holds me back is the runtime.
Yeah.
Not that there isn't use of the time used well, but there is a lot of excessive of the mundane when you're trying to build up the fact that the family does certain things in and out day after day. Like there's some repetitiveness in it that could easily be excised from that to try and create a faster sense of tension, especially as certain story elements play out where the father figure in this is suddenly now being examined for his behavior and his allegiance to the regime and everything else. It could move a little faster in that sense.
But I will argue that the director is conscious.
Of course.
National audiences are going to be watching this, and he needs to show you not only the mundane of this family, but then how that exists within this particular society.
I will also say the counter argument to this, you got another very long feature film that's getting award discussion here in The Brutalist, which is just about as long. And it comes down to specific selection of shots, whether you've got certain pacing in there. For me, Sacred Fig, as well intended and as well made as it is, because it's beautifully made, the pacing does drop in certain places. I will also say that in its pro category, it uses real life footage from social media, so much more up to date than the other contemporary partner in this, September the 5th. Both films use archival footage, both present and archaic, to try and showcase exactly what's happening as it's happening. It doesn't pull any punches, and it layers in the real lived-in experience that goes with this. So there are elements of the film where I was absolutely spellbound. And then as we got through certain elements of it where it was, again, them out shopping or them having conversations over dinner where I thought, okay, you could move past this, move to the next section. So my complaint would be the pacing only, but the performances are great. The story is not only timely, but incredibly urgent. And for so many people who will not be familiar with certain elements of international news or international culture outside what they hear from their next door neighbor, their friends on Facebook, whatever the case may be, this is an eye-opening, raw account of just what goes on beyond the borders in Iran.
Yeah. Raw is exactly the word I would use. This was actually my number 3 on the list. On my list.
Climbing up there.
I really thought that if you didn't know what was going on in Iran right now, you could go and watch this movie and have a great picture of it. You've got a picture of the youth perspective. You got the old regime's perspective. It was told in a very balanced way. It wasn't any propaganda piece other than the obvious. I mean, it's obvious he's not pro the regime, but he did show the regime in a balanced light. And I really thought that was hard to do. It's hard to not want to taint it with your own opinions and your own bias.
I do think it is slightly biased. I mean, there's a reason the director had to.
It's balanced bias.
It's a very intricate balance because I think you're right. It doesn't outright say like tear down the regime, but there is such an obvious acknowledgement of modern mentalities to women's rights and, individual rights that
Mhm.
just by existing, it so flies in the face of the regime. And that is counterintuitive to what the regime wants advertised for its people. So it is definitely biased, but I do think that
And
it
yet they're
doesn't
showing
flagrantly do so.
both perspectives. And that's what I appreciated. It wasn't just one side and everybody on the other side is bad.
Sure.
One side's good and everybody on the other side is bad. And that's what I appreciated about it. It isn't one, you're right, Dustin, that a lot of people are going to fly into the theaters and watch when they've got other choices that they know more about and that are more entertaining. But it's, like I said, it's one of the better films, and my criteria has nothing to do with box office. It has nothing to do with award.
Right.
It has to do with, what movies are we going to be talking about 10 years from now? And I absolutely think this is one of them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that was my number 3, but what was your number 8, Dustin?
Well, again, I'm now going in alphabetical order.
No, you're fine. It's me. My number 8 was The Substance.
Okay.
Maybe I'm a horror junkie, but I will say that on top of the things that Dustin said he found so enjoyable about it in terms of the fact that it was refreshingly different, it had a lot of really great cinematography to it. I love the fact that it takes the feminine argument, everything we've seen in the last few years, everything from #MeToo to, believing victims, everything else. There's been such a focus on the female perspective that this film very bravely turns it around and asks women to take some of the ownership for the problem. When you see Demi Moore's character taking the substance and realizing that as she gives into her other self and it starts to be taking her own essence from her, she's actively participating in something she knows is harmful, and she accepts it because of what society tells her to do, because of how she looks while she's doing it. You're starting to see the criticism actually being mirrored back. Like, if women really, really wanted to see change, you can't just blame the men all the time. There's women who are actively involved in this as well, and she's doing it to herself. There's a really unique criticism in there, in that, on top of all of the prosthetics and the body horror and everything else. I thought the music was fantastic. Demi Moore smashes this in a way that I am so glad she's showing, because she's not had a real standout in such a long time. So for me, it tickled every horror itch that I had, and also thought a little outside the box.
And as much praise as Demi Moore is getting, and she deserves it, she's great. Forget how great.
You need her as the mirror to what Demi goes through.
She deserves a supporting nomination as much as Demi deserves a leading nomination.
Absolutely. But yeah, it was so much fun. I would recommend it to just about anyone, but so many of the people I know in my personal life are so squeamish, I can't show it to anybody else.
Well, I watched it a second time. The editing is what stood out to me so much.
It's so slick. It is.
The editing is fantastic.
Yeah, so there you go.
So The Substance is higher on my list, and we can talk about it now since we're on the subject. Yeah, I thought Margaret Qualley was fantastic. I thought the dynamic between the two of them was really good. The story was great. I thought this movie was more science fiction than horror to me, and that's how I absorbed it. I put off watching this one for a very long time, and I regret it because I really enjoyed this movie. This was my number.
This is on a list for me for ages. It's like, oh my gosh, when I finally get to see this.
Yeah, I love it.
Loved it.
I love it.
All right, taking us in a different direction. So my next one, alphabetically, would be A Real Pain. Now, this is the opposite of what I've talked about before. This is the movie that I heard was great. I knew I would love it. It was going to be right up my alley. What really sold me before I watched this movie was I heard that you won't believe how funny it is and then how it ends so emotionally. And I was like, that's a roller coaster ride I want to take. I wanted to see that play out in a natural, cinematic, gimmicky way. And it really does. I mean, I am not a comedy person. It's very cool. And I am also, full disclosure, as a film critic, I try to not let my personal opinions of people affect my reviews and movies. But there are some actors sometimes so difficult for me to just, no matter how good they are or how talented, they just rub me the wrong way in real life. Jesse Eisenberg is one of them. I have such a difficult time watching him on screen. I think Jesse Eisenberg deserves an Oscar nomination, both for the writing and the acting in this. I think it's his best performance acting wise. He's very, very good. I mean, it goes without saying that Kieran Culkin is likely winning the Oscar for this. I think that may be our only sure thing in the acting races. But it's just a really beautiful, sweet film that really makes you think and laugh and cry, and just two cousins going on this emotional, spiritual just journey to discover their past and celebrate a loved one. And I think this is the kind of movie, and I showed this to literally my entire family, and everyone got something different, and everyone got something positive out of this movie. And if you want to rank it, this is going to be in my top 5 for sure.
Understandable. Yeah. So it's in my top 10. It's actually just outside my top 5. It's number 6 for me on here. So I'll just tag in there and say that Kieran Culkin, for me, and this just shows you how old I am, Kieran Culkin will always be Fuller from Home Alone 2. Like, he wets the bed. That's where I immediately always go to for him. So to see him doing things like Succession and actually owning that role, to see him doing different things in different other films where he's just playing with different characters and really bouncing off of scene partners, he's shown such versatility and such quick response time as an actor that it's brilliant to see him being such a live wire with such a soft, damaged underbelly to this. And it's all out of Jesse Eisenberg's writing. So I think that the script itself is probably where the film shines most, because it obviously is something that Jesse wrote, and he's got these 2 characters in mind, and they both deliver brilliantly on this. But it's the script that creates Kieran's character, and then Kieran just takes it and runs with it. So I'm not sure if there's going to be acting nominations for Jesse, because there's other actors out there, I think, who've got more showy performances.
I was just kind of saying that as someone who really doesn't like him. I was even voting for him for critics because I was so moved. I mean, that
he is good. He is very
dinner
good.
Scene,
absolutely
the best acting I've ever seen him do.
But Kieran Culkin, like, it's his film. It really is. I know he's the supporting actor, but it's his film.
And this is totally, Stephen Fry just did one that came out a few months earlier about the same family of Western Jews, American Jews, going back to Poland to see their heritage and see where their family came from. And that one was so much on the nose. This script was totally unpredictable from the start to the finish. And the finish was very, very moving.
It's one of the shortest movies of the year.
It absolutely is, yeah.
Movie
one and done. You're like, whoa, that was so quick.
All appreciate short. Okay, so my next one was The Nickel Boys, which I don't expect. I mean, that resonated with me on a level that I don't expect it to resonate with everyone. I'm hoping more people see this and are talking about it later on when it starts streaming or whatever. I know lots of people read the novel. It's not a true story, but it's a very true to life story. And if you grew up with the heritage that I grew up with, you heard stories like this all the time. You know, right here in Houston, there was a farm like that in Sugar Land, Texas, back in the days. And it was really, I liked the way they told the story. It was another coming of age story, just like Blitz, I guess. I'm on those. I'm on the coming of age bend right now. Again, that was an environment, and I like movies that put me in an environment and put audiences in an environment that you don't see every day.
This is another film, kind of like Blitz, that I wanted to be better. I did not appreciate the arguably gimmicky way that this was shot. That disillusioned me in my ability to take in and get inside the very important subject matter. I would almost like to see someone else attack this same subject matter, but make it like a normal shot drama without all these, behind the camera, never seeing the person that's talking, only seeing the person. I forget what the term is for how this is shot, but
that was annoying, but it didn't last the entire picture. And
it me. I mean, he kept swapping it, but I just, as someone who's, when I watch a movie, I'm not your normal audience member. I am not just soaking up the story. I'm looking at all these visual cues, what the cinematography, I'm literally sitting there taking notes. Oh, the cinematography is cool. Oh, the editing is cool. And this one I was constantly annoyed. I wanted to stop this so I can get in the story. And I wanted more of Anjanou Ellis. I thought I always want more of her in every movie that she's in. So there was definitely not enough of her, but I just wanted more from this because the story is very important. When they're telling you the stuff at the end, you're like, I wanted to see more of what we're seeing in the credits at the end. It tells me a lot of things that I'm like, show me. I wanted to see what you're telling me there at the end.
And maybe that's the difference. I mean, I've seen all those movies and all those made for TV movies and all of those adaptations of stories like that, where they show you the unmarked graves and they show you the police discovering the unmarked graves or whoever discovering the unmarked grave later. I guess I already brought that to the movie.
The
So-
movie it reminded me of was Philomena, the Judi Dench.
Interesting.
film.
Yes.
Yeah. Talking about the same kind of institution where these people were getting away with this for the longest time, and you're going back and you're making a movie to remind and expose people about history that certain people are trying to keep secrets and buried. And I know people had issues with Philomena, that it was very on the nose, but that movie really drew, it could bring any audience in. It was basic filmmaking. It was all about the story and all about the acting and all about the emotion. This, because of the way it's shot, subverts some of that, and that bothered me. I wanted something a little bit more old-fashioned with this to get a little bit more inside the emotion.
If it had been more on the nose, it wouldn't have been anything entertaining for me. And I guess
Right.
that's the difference. Maybe this wasn't for me, for an audience of people who already knew the story. It was
Yeah.
for, an audience of people who didn't know the story.
Well, I would venture that the first person perspective can be effective, and it was effective in certain stretches where you're having conversation and you're trying to get a direct funnel into the speaking person when you go over the shoulder with someone listening. But it does it so often that it draws out conversations, which I think Dustin's saying, like, sometimes you fall out of the conversation. Sometimes you get these really beautifully intricate, almost fantastical first person shots, like the little girl who slides under his bus seat and then it goes underneath her when he's watching her go back to her seat on the bus. Some of that is just so exceptionally shot, but it's done for flair without purpose. And then when you actually have full blown conversations, or you're trying to advance a story where you go from one perspective to the next, some of it overlaps. Some of it's just the other side of the conversation you're literally hearing again at the cafeteria table, things like that. It does take you out of the film to the point where the big reveal at the end that he takes Elwood's name and lives his life later on, it rang almost hollow to me. I know what it's trying to go for, but because we don't know who the adult really is, we assume we know who it is, but we don't really know who it is because it's always over his shoulder, first person the entire time. That by the time you get to the real, you're like, wait, is that really what happened? And it's done so tacked on towards the end, like the driver's license photo and everything else. I think it was not necessarily a mistake, but it was a creative endeavor that I think got out of Ross's hands as director. He got a little too carried away with that perspective taking over as the reason to see the film. The story alone sells the reason to see the film, but when you start doing things in front of the camera that dazzle the eyes too much or dazzles the attention too much, it softens or it takes away from the impact of what you're trying to say. And I think Dustin's right with that.
And and it's sad for me because I know that the filmmaking style here, the ambitious, what he's trying, is going to hurt some people watching it. They're either going to turn it off if they're watching a screener and they're a voter, or if they're going to a theater watching it at home, they're going to feel it more complicated than is necessary.
I will say this, though, that when it does work, it does give the film a visual identity unlike anything else I've seen this year. When it actually does pay off with singular shots, like just seeing Elwood in the jungle gym in the very beginning, and you're seeing little kids playing, or there's certain things you just don't see in movies these days that are done like that. So there are moments where when it breathes out and it just resonates, it's beautifully done. But when you're actually trying to move the story, more traditional camera work should have been used. And because it chops and changes between first person and not, you just want to take Ross by the shoulder and go, dude, take one and stick with it.
Right. The scene that always struck me the most is when Anjanou Ellis's character comes to finally visit him in the prison. She briefly talks about her struggle getting there and how difficult it was. And we already know she's not a wealthy person and that she's working as a waitress and she's struggling. And, we're supposed to, remember those cues to understand, oh, it was difficult for her to get there. But I told James, I said, what he's missing visually is that her getting in that car, her driving so long by herself, how maybe she got lost along the way, how stressed out she was, how she got herself together so she could put on a good face. She doesn't get to see him. She talks to, the friend, but, we missed all of that from her character, how difficult it must have been for her time driving all the way up there by herself, probably didn't know where she was going. There was a whole thing there that we missed.
That same conversation, like Anjanou is delivering a masterclass in emotional resonance with, she's just so good in that scene. We don't get to see how this impacts Elwood because we're seeing completely her side of it. You can show all of that with her, but to get the interplay between grandmother and grandson, you lose some of that because it's just her from his first person perspective.
Right.
So again, stylistic choice aside, it's an emotionally powerful film and an important one as well.
And I see you guys' point, and I don't disagree with it. I'm just saying that we've seen that before. I don't. I mean, I think
You may have, but if we're not watching, I didn't know.
you've
I've
seen
never
that
heard of.
before.
I have
That
never
scene
heard
you just
this.
described is the help. It's one of those ladies
Whoa.
making her way to work.
Anthony Ellis is in the help.
You just that. So yes, you've seen that before. We've seen that.
I
before.
guess.
You dropped the H
Absolutely.
word. My goodness.
But you know, as a filmmaker, if I had Anthony Ellis right there, I would strive for any moment to give her more screen time.
We can all agree on that.
Absolutely. Without a
Yeah.
doubt.
Mark, what was your next one?
All right. So we had to circle back here because I think we glossed over one there. We had Dustin's number 7, number 6 for me. Number 7 for me. A Different Man. I loved this. And maybe it's just the theater kid in me again, but the focus of a play being what drives someone crazy as they see their life being stolen from them. To me, it was such a wonderfully profound metaphor to see details from Sebastian Stan's character's real life being pulled out, stretched apart, examined, re-examined, and used for, emotional fodder for a crowd to kind of feed on. It was just fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. I thought there were some really dynamic storytelling choices here. I love the makeup is so doggone realistic. To hear that Sebastian spent time, actually in the makeup, just strolling the streets of New York to try and get into character, to see how people would react to him when he looked the way he did, and then to make the transition itself. He's had such a fantastic year between this and The Apprentice, both demanding makeovers and transformations that are really, really intense. But there's something about that play within the play kind of layering to this that I thought was really fascinating as someone's grappling with their idea of identity, especially when he achieves something that I think most people on a very superficial level would say you should be happy with the change you've had. But when you're seeing the defining qualities of who you are, what you use to define yourself being thrown at you, when it's being thrown against you, when it's being used to make you less desirable because you're no longer that certain thing, it was a fascinating examination on identity. And I can't think of any other actor now, aside from Sebastian, who would have been great for that role. I'm sure that you guys would suggest other ones, but maybe it's because he's just having a moment. Sebastian Stan owns this, and he disappears in the makeup. To me, it was just fascinating to watch.
Wow.
Well, I watched it obviously after he got a Golden Globe nomination for this. I just, for whatever reason, had no interest. I didn't know really anything about it watching it. I just he got nominated. I need to see all the nominees. So I watched it. I agree with you about the makeup. I mean, it took me a minute to understand what was going on here. I did not like this at all. I just did not get into this. I mean, it could definitely be a double feature with The Substance.
It's a Friday night.
I was annoyed watching this, and I don't know. I just did not care for this. I have not seen The Apprentice yet. I didn't like it. This is movies where I just wanted to shake my wet hands and go dry them off and move on to the next thing.
Now, for me, it was almost Shakespearean. He's even given a mask of his face to kind of get over maybe the shell shock of having changed his face. There were elements where I was like, I was giddy over how clever it was. It was just fantastic.